A Roman emperor rode east to face his enemy. He carried the hopes of a dying empire like a shield. But he returned not as a conqueror, he returned as a slave. A crown became chains, glory became dust, and an emperor's name became a warning to every ruler who believed Rome could never fall. Before we continue, subscribe. It helps us keep history's greatest stories alive. He was born Publius Licinius Valerianus, but Rome would one day call him Valerian. He did not grow in the shadows of ambition like so many emperors before him. He grew in the quiet halls of an old, noble family, raised with discipline, duty, and the belief that Rome was eternal. He never chased power. Power came looking for him. For decades, he served the state with a steady hand. He governed provinces, commanded legions, and advised emperors who trusted his judgment more than their own. In a time when murder was a path to the throne, Valerian survived by something far rarer than cruelty. He survived by dignity. Rome noticed. He was the kind of man soldiers saluted without being told to, the kind of man senators listened to even after he stopped speaking. For years, emperors leaned on him whenever the empire shook, and in the 3rd century, the empire never stopped shaking. Rome was breaking, and everyone felt it. The frontiers were collapsing like old walls kicked in by barbarians. Germanic tribes stormed across the Rhine. Goths carved their way into the Balkans. The Danube frontier, once a shield of iron, now leaked invaders like water through cracked stone. And in the east, a new and ruthless empire was rising, the Sassanids. Inside Rome, things were no better. Plague swept through cities like a scythe. Armies deserted. Usurpers declared themselves emperors in every distant province. The economy twisted, broke, and bled. Coins lost value, trade died. Faith in Rome's future evaporated. For the first time, the empire that ruled the world no longer ruled itself. Some defeats echo longer than victories. In this chaos came the brief rule of Emperor Gallus, a man who inherited a firestorm too large to control. Provinces rebelled, enemies advanced, and Rome begged for someone, anyone, who could restore order. They turned to Valerian, not because he wanted the throne, because no one else could hold it. In 253 AD, Valerian marched toward Rome with his legions, not as a conqueror, but as a savior summoned by the Senate itself. Gallus died before he arrived, but the empire was already looking toward the man who had never failed them. Senators stepped aside, soldiers knelt. Rome embraced him like a drowning city grasping at its last lifeline. Valerian became emperor in an emergency, and emergencies rarely wait for coronations. He inherited a world in flames, but unlike many before him, he did not panic. He reorganized armies, he strengthened borders, he restored discipline where there was only fear. He raised new legions, rebuilt old forts, and called veterans back into service. For a moment, just a moment, Rome felt the faint heartbeat of stability. Rome held its breath, but while Valerian struggled to heal the empire, a new storm gathered in the east. A storm with a name, Shapur. Shapur I, King of Kings, ruler of the Sassanid Empire, son of Ardashir the founder. His empire was young, ambitious, and hungry. It looked at Rome the way wolves look at wounded prey. Shapur saw an empire collapsing under its own weight, and he intended to strike before it could stand again. His riders burned Roman cities. His army swept into Mesopotamia. He captured Antioch, Rome's jewel of the East, and sent a message that echoed across continents. The East did not fear Rome anymore. Valerian understood immediately. If the East fell, the rest of the empire would follow. He gathered the largest army Rome had assembled in decades. Veterans scarred from a lifetime of wars marched beside boys barely old enough to hold a shield. They marched for one reason: to stop Shapur. Valerian rode at the front, bronze glinting under the sun. Behind him moved legions, auxiliaries, cavalry, siege engines, a moving city of war. Rome had not breathed such determination in years, and in those first months it worked. Valerian struck hard, reclaiming cities Shapur had stolen. Roman eagles rose again on captured walls. Refugees returned to homes they feared lost forever. For the first time in years, the East whispered in relief. Some victories are only the start of a tragedy. As the armies marched deeper into the East, something else marched with them. A new plague, harsher, crueler, faster than any before. Soldiers collapsed mid-march, shivering under desert heat. Camps filled with fever. Entire cohorts dissolved into sickness. Officers died in their tents. The disease cared nothing for Rome, its emperor, or its destiny. The plague did what Shapur's armies could not. It broke the Roman advance. Valerian tried to save the campaign. He slowed the march, reorganized the sick, urged local leaders to send supplies. But supply lines failed. Grain rotted. Horses died. Allies, once eager to support Rome, suddenly weighed their choices and walked away. An empire can survive enemies. It struggles to survive doubt. The desert swallowed morale. Word spread of Shapur's new strength, of his enormous cavalry, of the prisoners taken on the frontier. Stories of Roman defeats grew with each retelling. Whispers started to follow Valerian's army like ghosts. What if the East could not be saved? What if Shapur was too strong? What if Rome had finally met its rival? Valerian heard the whispers. He felt the fear in the dust-heavy air. And still he pushed forward. Because he knew something every emperor before him understood. If Rome retreated, it would never regain the East. Retreat would become collapse, and collapse would become doom. So Valerian marched, even as the plague ate through his ranks faster than swords. Every night his campfires burned fewer. Every morning the dead were carried away in silence. Rome held its breath again, this time in dread. Valerian hoped for reinforcements, for the tide to turn, for one piece of fortune to help him face the enemy that waited ahead. But messages from the West brought only more chaos. Rebellions, invasions, desperation. He was alone on a shrinking frontier. Still he prepared for the battle he knew was coming. A battle he could not avoid. A battle he had to win if Rome was to survive even one more generation. And in the East, Shapur waited. The King of Kings knew the plague had hollowed the Roman army. He knew supplies were failing. He knew allies were gone. And he knew that Valerian, proud, experienced, noble Valerian, would push forward anyway. Shapur did not fear Rome. He expected Rome to fear him. The desert wind carried the tension of two worlds moving toward collision. Roman scouts vanished into the horizon and never returned. Sassanid riders watched from distant hills, shadows against the dying sun. The roads grew hostile. The land grew silent. And Valerian rode deeper into a fate no emperor had ever faced. Some defeats are written long before the first sword is drawn. By the time Valerian reached the next battlefield, he was not leading the army he had marched from Rome. What remained was a wounded force, exhausted, diseased, and hungry. But the emperor stayed with them. He refused to retreat. He refused to abandon the East. He rode out as an emperor. He would meet Shapur as something far less. Valerian stood on the edge of a battlefield that felt more like a graveyard than a place of war. The air was heavy with sickness, dust, and the quiet dread of men who knew they were not marching toward victory. They were marching toward survival, and even that seemed uncertain. His soldiers were starving, exhausted, and dying faster than he could bury them. The Sassanid army waited across the plain, fresh and unbroken. Their banners snapped in the wind. Their cavalry lines stretched farther than the eye could see. And somewhere among them, sitting tall on a horse draped in gold, was the man that Valerian had come to face, Shapur I, the King of Kings, and the East did not forgive. The first clash was a disaster. Roman formations broke under the weight of Sassanid cavalry. Shields split, horses fell, dust swallowed sunlight. The plague-ridden soldiers could barely lift their arms. Some fought with the fury of desperation. Others simply collapsed mid-charge. The emperor watched his army crumble like sand slipping through fingers. Shapur pressed every weakness. He knew Rome was dying in front of him. By the second day, Valerian understood what his officers whispered behind closed tent flaps. The war was lost. The army could not win. If he stayed and fought, every last Roman would die on that barren field, and the East would fall forever. So the emperor made a choice no emperor had ever made. He asked for peace. Valerian sent envoys to Shapur's camp, seeking negotiations, a truce, a prisoner exchange, anything that could save what little remained of his forces. He hoped Shapur would see reason, or at least advantage. A captured emperor might still bargain. A dead one could not. But Shapur did not want peace. He wanted Rome on its knees. Shapur agreed to meet. He invited Valerian to his camp, promising safe conduct, an emperor speaking to an emperor. But Shapur's promises were traps disguised as courtesy. As Valerian rode forward, weakened, worn, and desperate to save his men, Sassanid riders surrounded him. There was no negotiation, no treaty, no honor. Shapur seized him. For the first and only time in Roman history, an emperor was taken captive by a foreign power. The news would echo across continents, but in that moment, Valerian was simply a man dragged from his horse, bound and forced into the dust by soldiers who had waited for this humiliation. Rome held its breath, and this time it suffocated. Valerian was dragged eastward, paraded through towns, so the people of Persia could witness the fall of Rome's greatness. Shapur wanted a spectacle. He wanted the world to know the King of Kings had broken the empire that had once ruled the earth. Some accounts say Valerian was tortured during this march. Others write he was flayed alive, his skin stuffed with straw and displayed as a warning. A few suggest he died quietly of illness, his suffering hidden behind stone walls. But all accounts agree on one thing. Shapur destroyed any illusion of Roman supremacy. In captivity, the humiliation deepened. Shapur kept Valerian close, not as a prisoner of war, but as a living trophy. When he mounted his horse, he forced Valerian to kneel so he could use the emperor's back as a step. An emperor of Rome, once master of the world, now bowed beneath Shapur's feet. Some defeats echo longer than victories. Roman pride shattered. News traveled slowly, fragmented, and unbelievable. Whispers spread through legions, markets, and the Senate itself. Many refused to believe it. Others tried to hide it. How could Rome admit that its emperor, its symbol, its shield, now served as a footstool in Persia? So Rome lied. Official messengers claimed Valerian was unable to return. They spoke of illness, diplomatic missions, unfinished campaigns, anything to avoid the truth. But soldiers on the frontier knew. Traitors knew. Enemies knew. Rome's emperor lived in chains. Valerian's end is one of history's great uncertainties. Different chroniclers describe different horrors. Some say he was confined for years, slowly dying in captivity. Others write that Shapur had him flayed alive, his skin stuffed with straw and displayed as a warning. A few suggest he died quietly of illness, his suffering hidden behind stone walls. But all accounts agree on one thing. Shapur destroyed any illusion of Roman supremacy. In captivity, the humiliation deepened. Shapur kept Valerian close, not as a prisoner of war, but as a living trophy. When he mounted his horse, he forced Valerian to kneel so he could use the emperor's back as a step. An emperor of Rome, once master of the world, now bowed beneath Shapur's feet. Some defeats echo longer than victories. Back in Rome, chaos followed the emperor's disappearance. With Valerian gone, his son Gallienus ruled alone. Rebellions tore through the empire. Breakaway states rose in the west and east. Generals crowned themselves emperors. The borders collapsed. The empire split and bled from every direction. Valerian's capture had not just broken the East, it had broken Rome's confidence in itself. But even in this tragedy,
His legacy endured. He had tried to hold a dying empire together. He had marched into the storm when others fled from it. He had carried the weight of Rome until it crushed him. And though his name is often remembered for chains, his story is a reminder of how fragile power truly is. Crowns break, empires crumble, and sometimes even emperors die in chains. Hey there, I know you enjoyed this video. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also ensure you do well to check out other amazing stories from this channel. Thank you.